Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Tevis-Finn, recording from room 114. Welcome to the origin of the Cold War, part 2. And I'm opening up with this slide to review the main differences between the Soviet Union and the United States. What are their main concerns during this era? And so remember guys, security is so important to the Soviet Union. They want all the surrounding countries along their borders to be communist. Because of the destruction that Germany caused to their country during World War II, they want to keep Germany weak, and they definitely want to replace capitalism with communism. Over here, guys, the United States, remember, believed that the Depression had caused World War II. The economic instability from the Depression had led countries like Japan and Germany to seize smaller countries. So economic stability was important for peace. The reduced trading that we saw during the 1930s, they believed had caused the war. And so global connections, meaning alliances and increasing trade, was important. And how to go about doing that was through democracy and free enterprise, right? No restrictions on the economy. And so I want to point out again that this Cold War period, marked by political tension and an arms race between the Soviet Union and the United States, like I said, used to have an ending date of around 1991. Just this morning I hear news about the Ukraine. So we can definitely have a discussion about whether or not the Cold War is over. So let's get right into number 7 and President Truman. So under A, it's important to note that 11 days after confronting the Soviets, FDR dies. And so notice now he's in the chair. He's pretty different from FDR in that he was strongly anti-communist. That's for B. He truly believed that World War II had begun because Britain had tried to appease Hitler and not confront him head on. D. He did not want to make the same mistakes with Stalin. He has been quoted to have said, "We must stand up to the Russians." E. He met with the Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov and demanded Stalin hold free elections in Poland. This didn't go over too well. And F. This meeting marked another increase in tensions between the two sides. So I describe this time period almost like a pot that is simmering, getting closer and closer to boiling over. I'm on to number 8, the Potsdam Conference. So Truman met Stalin at Potsdam, which is near Berlin, to work out a deal about Germany. Under B, Truman was convinced that the German economy had to recover for the rest of Europe to be stable and not turn to communism. That's important enough for me to repeat. So he was convinced that the German economy had to recover for the rest of Europe to be stable and not turn to communism. Stalin over here is concerned about German reparations. He wants Germany to pay for the war had ruined the Soviet economy. To finish off that C, the Soviets had even stripped their zone in Germany of the industrial equipment, and it wasn't enough. So they brought those things, like factories equipment back home, but he still wanted payment. So under D, Truman was against this. He suggested to the Soviets that they take just reparations from their zone. But Stalin was against this as his zone was mostly agricultural and it wasn't going to help his economy. E. To get the Soviets to accept, Truman offered Stalin a small amount of industrial equipment from the other 3 zones. Stalin had to pay for this with food shipments from their zone. So I'm going to repeat that deal. It's important. So under E, guys, Truman offers Stalin a small amount of industrial equipment. Let's think of like machines, right, from factories. So from the 3 other zones. But it's not just a one-sided deal. Stalin has to pay for that, for those machines, with food shipments from his zone. Under F, Truman also offered to accept a new German-Polish border that the Soviets had established. Remember, the border was important for the Soviets to feel safe. G. Stalin did not like this proposal. He felt bullied. He also felt that the U.S. wanted to limit reparations to keep the Soviets weak. So here's one of the first examples of the Soviets becoming defensive or paranoid. Under H, Stalin accepted the deal because the U.S. and Great Britain controlled Germany's industrial center. He had to cooperate with them in order to get the reparations. Again, this deal marked an increase in tensions, for mistrust began to build up on both sides. They are no longer allies. And so this slide kind of sums up that the mistrust builds. During the war, Americans saw Stalin and the Soviets as allies. And we begin to see communism really spread in Eastern Europe. Before I go on to number 9, the question is, so there's no longer a common enemy like Germany or Japan. Can these two superpowers coexist? Okay guys, number 9, the Iron Curtain. So under A, the Soviets refused to make stronger commitments to the Declaration for Liberated Europe. So they were not promoting freedom and democracy. I mean, this map kind of shows how extensive their influence was. Under B, the presence of the Soviet army, for it was the largest army after World War II, those troops, in countries in Eastern Europe, encouraged communist governments to be set up. A quote by Stalin is, "Whoever occupies a territory also imposes his own social system. It cannot be otherwise." So this quote then leads to C. Communist countries came to be called satellite countries, controlled by the Soviets just like planets orbiting around the sun, for the pull was very strong. For D, these nations had to remain communist, and they had to be friendly to the Soviet Union. Under E, this date got cut off a little bit, but I think you guys can still see it, March 5th, 1946. After watching the communists take over Eastern Europe, Winston Churchill gave a speech in Fulton, Missouri, describing an iron curtain falling across Eastern Europe. And for the next 43 years, this phrase was used to mean the separation between the East and the West. And guys, number F. By 1954, the USSR became comprised of 15 Soviet republics, each agreeing to be part of the Union, and their governments were all based on Marxism and Lenin's ideals. So you'll need to know this map and be able to recognize and identify the Iron Curtain that separates Europe. And this kind of goes over F. So 15 republics. And just in conclusion, in the Peace Corps, I served in one of these republics. It was called Uzbekistan. So I have good stories to tell you about how these people cherished their freedom. I was there during their 7th year of freedom from the Soviet Union. So the number 7 was put all over the stadiums. We went to a soccer stadium and they marched around this big number 7. So that can kind of give you an idea of how heavy the control was in the Soviet Union. And the next conflict, guys, is going to be Berlin. So that will be our next screencast. This is Tevi, signing off.